Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. So this is going to be the next instalment in my series Incomplete Collections, which I've not done an instalment of for quite some time. This is where I show my collection of an artist on vinyl where the collection is not complete. I don't really have much of a completist streak, so most of my collection is incomplete. So anyway, today we're going to look at the Australian band AC/DC, and this is their first worldwide album, High Voltage. One of the ones I got back when I was a kid. I would have got this in probably about 82, 83. Like most teenagers back in the 80s, I got into AC/DC, I guess, sort of as a form of rebellion, I suppose. I've told this story before on my channel. You know, I got into music really early in the late 70s, and you know, back then pop music seemed to be quite raw and exciting. My perception of music was that it was changing and all going a bit kind of hairspray and girly. I don't still necessarily subscribe to that, but that's how it seemed at the time. So when I went to secondary school at the age of 11, by the time I got into my second year there, I noticed that quite a lot of the lads were drawing the classic AC/DC logo on their exercise books. It's not on this record, funnily enough, not the proper block logo that we all know and love. And I heard lads talking about them, and then one of my friends lent me, or gave me, a tape of Back in Black. And it was around about the time that I had a personal stereo for the first time, and that made quite a big impact. So I started to look for AC/DC records in the shops, and I quickly became aware that they had these great covers, great sleeves. And the first one I got was not this one. We'll get to the first one. And the cover of the first album I got, I just totally loved it. And the music was so just raw and powerful. By about 1980, I'd started to clue into what you might call proper rock and roll music. After John Lennon was assassinated, I got the Beatles Rock and Roll Music Volume 1, I think, on vinyl, and that's when I first heard songs by Chuck Berry and, you know, all the early rock and rollers. So when I heard AC/DC for the first time, I guess for the first time I was hearing a kind of extreme version of that. The guitars were much rawer and much more extreme than anything I'd listened to at that point. You had Bon Scott's screaming vocals and his delivery. It's quite funny because my parents had been quite tolerant of the music that I was into, but AC/DC I think was one step too far, for my dad in particular. You know, the anti-education slant of some of the lyrics and just the extremity of the music, but I just loved it. So for about 2 years I was a real kind of AC/DC fan. I was buying all their records. Every time it seemed to me that we went into town, I would just, you know, go to the racks and I would choose them based on how much I liked the covers. This is one of the first ones I got, High Voltage, and this is not the High Voltage which originally came out. I'll try and give you some dates as we go. AC/DC's vinyl debut actually was on the 17th of February 1975, and that was the Australian version of High Voltage, which I've never actually owned. And then TNT came out on the 1st of December 75, and I've never owned that one either. I used to see TNT in the racks, but for some reason I never bought it. So this one, High Voltage, was the first. This is the first worldwide release, 14th of May 76, and it was basically the TNT album, I think, with maybe a couple of tracks thrown in from the original High Voltage. And what I loved about this one, I mean, I just loved the cover anyway. I loved Angus's personality. My mum used to hate Angus Young. She used to think, oh God, who's that cretin, you know. It was a sort of purposefully cretinous appearance, really. But the back cover of this record features all these wonderful letters. You've got the letter from the from the fan to Bon Scott. Dear Bon, my dad says that under your leather trousers there lurks something mean and terrible. You have this classic faked letter from the headmaster of Angus and Malcolm's school to their parents, basically, just, you know, complaining about their behaviour. Won't you please, Mrs. Young, have a talk with Malcolm and Angus to help us try to make them into responsible citizens? You've got this letter from somebody to Phil Rudd, the drummer. Enclosed, please find the remains of the drumsticks you broke over my daughter's head last Friday night, or was it a billiard cue? She is still a little uncertain. My solicitors will be in touch with you concerning the charges I am filing against you on her behalf. I love the humour of it. It was, you know, to a 13, 14-year-old boy, it just made perfect sense. And this is a terrific record. Produced, of course, by the production team of Vanda and Young. That's Harry Vanda and George Young being the brother of Angus and Malcolm. They didn't quite, I don't think, have the full AC/DC sound worked out at this point. This record is very shrieky and squawky, a bit trebly. The guitars don't yet have the resonance that they would have later on. But the guitar attack of Angus and Malcolm is still there musically. One of the really amazing things about AC/DC is how well evolved their sound was right from the get-go, and they were so young. I think Angus and Malcolm had been, you know, into the guitar and into rock and roll from a very early age. We're talking probably from the age of about, you know, 7 or 8. They've been playing guitars and they'd really worked out their sound. And I think AC/DC were musically very good, or, you know, are musically very good. They had a kind of chiseled approach to composition. Intriguingly, they used to write their songs, or they used to work out the songs on the piano. I think it was maybe Harry Vanda or George Young could play the piano, so they used to work out the chords on the piano, and then they used to transfer it to guitar and dirty it up. So the songs had this really quite a sophisticated structure. You know, the way that the chords would be distributed between Angus and Malcolm, the different inversions. They would play stuff that was locked together but not quite the same. And very, very powerful. And Phil Rudd, the drummer, really incredible. On this record, you've got Mark Evans, of course, the original bass player, and he's on the first 3 records. And he's not quite as good, I don't think, as Cliff Williams. When Cliff joins the band in 77, 78, something like that, their sound really became extremely powerful at that point. But this is a fun record. It's got the Jack on it, which, interestingly, my mum used to like that track. I think she found the sort of double entendres quite clever, just amazingly. It's a long way to the top, of course, which has got bagpipes on it, Bon Scott on bagpipes. It just works so fantastically well. Who would have thought that, you know, bagpipes on a rock track like that would work so well? Rock and Roll Singer is a classic. Live Wire is fantastic. On side 2, they really show their bluesy side with the song Little Lover, which has some great blues playing on it. You got She's Got Balls and then High Voltage at the end. It's a very accomplished debut, actually, and just one that is still incredibly listenable all these years later. It's like I said, they don't quite have the sound nailed in terms of the production. Anyway, so that was the 14th of May 1976 that came out, and then on the 20th of September 76 we've got this one. And again, this is one that I bought back in the early 80s, and this is Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. This one came with a lyric sheet that had some pictures on, and I'm ashamed to say I lost my lyric sheet somewhere down the line. No idea where it is, so that's a shame. All these records, of course, are on Atlantic. And you know, I was playing these records again recently and just remarking to myself how AC/DC, they do manage to transcend taste, really. It's interesting on the VC, if you watch various channels, you'll get people you wouldn't expect to be into this kind of music. I'm thinking of John Heaton. You know, John Heaton is a Beatles fan and a Bob Dylan fan, but he really likes AC/DC. I've got a feeling even Headley, another fat bearded man talking about records, who really stays away from any kind of heavy metal, I've got a feeling he has got a sneaking fondness for them. And I guess in the Bon Scott era, they were not really a heavy metal band, they were a blues band. And again, that's interesting. You get people on the heavy metal side of the fence who would say, you know, there's no way I would ever listen to a blues record, and yet they will hold up something like this and say, you know, I love this, not really realising that that's just a blues record. It's just a very rocked up and aggressive blues record mixed in with rock and roll. AC/DC's sound was a kind of amalgam of blues with a kind of Little Richard-y, Chuck Berry kind of slant to it, but then ramped up. And as the 1970s progressed, I don't know whether they were influenced by punk, but there was a strange synchronicity that went on, because they came into the middle of the 1970s as punk was breaking. Their music, I think, even appealed to the punks because it had that very aggressive, hard driving, not sort of hard driving like Leonard Skinner, but hard driving like almost like kind of early Clash, except they could play their instruments. They were just fantastic musicians. This record is one of their more good-timey ones. It's notable actually for having probably the only ballad that AC/DC ever did, the track Ride On side 2. It's not really a ballad, it's more of a sort of slow blues, but it's quite a sensitive song. It's nothing like anything they'd done before or would go on to do again. And this record has got a good-timey feel. You've got the title track, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, which is brilliant. Big Balls, which has a kind of Little Richard feel to it. Rocker and Problem Child are both good. Side 2, not quite as strong, but yeah, it's not absolute top drawer AC/DC, but it's a good fun album. And yeah, that one, like I said, I would have bought that in about 82, 83. Okay, so then, released on the 21st of March 1977, we've got what some people think is their masterpiece, at least from the 1970s. This is Let There Be Rock. And I just love this cover. I've got such strong memories of being in record shops, looking at the cover and just, you know, if these people here didn't have green arms, it wouldn't be the cover that it is. I mean, it's still a great cover, it's a great photograph, but the fact that the audience members are pictured with green skin, it's just a stroke of genius. And there's the back cover with Angus. I don't know why, but I never got this one back in the 80s. This is one, I got a feeling I picked this up much later, maybe in the mid-90s. I don't even know why. Can't think why I wouldn't have wanted this one, but and really it's kind of like, you know, it's the one that has so many of their most significant tracks on. I mean, Whole Lot of Rosie at the end is their greatest song, I think. Just the driving energy, the pile driving arrangement of that track is just truly extraordinary. You know, they they worked like a jump blues band in a way, or like a Duke Ellington section, and they were just so locked in together, so incredibly kind of hardwired into each other. I don't know how they got that sound. Just endless rehearsing, I guess, and a huge amount of playing live. Whole Lot of Rosie, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. Side 2, the opener, Go Down, is an absolute classic. And then you got Let There Be Rock as well. Just a blistering record, and I think that was the one which really saw them starting to make inroads into the international market. So yeah, Let There Be Rock, and I think this is the last record that Mark Evans played on. I think he was sacked from the band, replaced by Cliff Williams. He was a brilliant bass player. We'll get onto him in a minute. So the 5th of May 1978, and this is the first AC/DC record I ever got, and this is my original copy of it. This is Powerage, or Powerage as some people say. I've always said Powerage, I'm not sure which is which. Got a feeling Angus Young calls it Powerage, which is good enough for me. This features a big crease down here, you can see. That's where I shoved it into my school bag to take it into school, because at that point AC/DC, there was such a cool band in a way amongst boys. I mean, they were not a cool band, a proper cool band, but they had a certain cachet to them, and if you had an AC/DC record you would take it to school to show people. So I crammed this one into my bag. Great big crease there. A few years ago, shortly after I joined the VC, I picked up another copy of it from Vod Music in Mold in North Wales, so I've got a nice pristine copy of this now. And so this record, there's two different versions of this. My original one, I've got a feeling, was the European version, which starts with Gimme a Bullet. I'm not sure which version is which. This is the one, I think, which was released in America. Starts with Rock and Roll Damnation, and Gimme a Bullet is the second track. There's a kind of different track lists, different order of tracks. This is the one that I grew up with, so I always think of Gimme a Bullet as being the opening track. Down Payment Blues. I think this is the record where Bon Scott really comes to the fore as a great lyricist. I mean, just the words on Down Payment Blues, they are like a blues track. They are like a blues song, a blues lyric. I think Bon was obviously very influenced by the blues. Quite a few of his lyrics have a kind of blues slant to them, you know, something you can imagine Muddy Waters having written. But Down Payment Blues is this great track about, you know, basically not having any money, can't even feed my cat. He sings it at one point. And also you've got Sin City, which has that fantastic middle eight. Ladders and Snakes, Ladders Give, Snakes Take, Rich Man, Poor Man, Beggar Man, Thief, Ain't Got a Hope in Hell, That's My Belief. You know, rock and roll poet, I think. And this record has got such a great groove to it. It came out in 1978. A couple of critics picked up on maybe a slight disco influence. Maybe came through Cliff Williams' bass playing. He had this very throbbing kind of style. He would just play on one note, but there was something about the way he and Phil Rudd locked together, which was almost danceable. A track like Gone Shooting, you can sort of dance to it. It's a strange combination. It's blues, rock and roll, slight elements of dance music coming through. And this is a record that has the most kind of punky sound. The guitars are so well recorded. I'd never heard electric guitars like this. When I first got into this record, if it was the microphone placement or something, you could hear every last little string, you know, really kind of intimate guitar sound. But then this great big roar would come, and just incredible. Side 2 I think is a little bit weaker than side 1, although side 2 does start with Sin City. Riff Raff at the end of side 1. maybe that as well as Whole Lot of Rosie, if you played those two tracks to somebody, that would, basically nail AC/DC. Riff Raff has just got this absolutely explosive pile driving kind of sound. The arrangement is fantastic. Their grasp of dynamics and arrangements and the way to crescendo and then keep the audience waiting for something, build something up, tension and release, I suppose, second to none. So there we go, Powerage from 1978, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, 5th of May 78. Then on the 13th of October 78, this was the second AC/DC record that I ever got, and you can see again all the creases down here, which is where I shoved it into my school bag. And this is the one with all the blood and all the gore, and again, teenage boys love this kind of thing. So this is one of the great live albums. Bought, I see, from W.H. Smith's, which is a newsagent in the UK, £5.49. And again, I think from Vod Music in Mould, I picked up a nice version a few years back. So this record obviously contains live versions of Riff Raff, which is the opening track. You've got the Jack, Whole Lot of Rosie, High Voltage, Let There Be Rock, None More Blistering, and one of the great album covers, I think. Sure you'd agree. If You Want Blood, You Got It. Which is a song from the next album. So the next album, which again I have an original of, came out on the 27th of July 1979. This is my original copy of it. I don't think I did shove this one into my bag, although I can see a crease there, which means I may have done. It's not in the best condition. The sleeve is kind of split there. Should get a reissue of this, really. So this is the one which they recorded with Mutt Lange. It was the first album they did with Mutt Lange, trying to appeal to a more American audience. At that point, Mutt Lange hadn't done Def Leppard, so he hadn't quite codified that big MTV kind of sound, but he had a more commercial slant. He worked the band really hard. He made Bon Scott work on his vocals quite famously, taught him some vocal technique, got him to sing a bit rather than just howling and shrieking and screaming. And he gave the guitars a more commercial kind of sound, more a kind of radio-friendly kind of sound. And I would imagine he worked with them on the songs as well to get more commercial choruses coming through. This is the record where Malcolm and Cliff start to come forward doing these very strong backing vocals on songs such as Highway to Hell, Girls Got Rhythm, Walk All Over You. Much more commercial, like I said, much more radio friendly. And that record, I guess, was their big, huge first commercial step, into the big world of maybe arena rock at that point. Not sure if they did do arenas before Bon died, or whether perhaps that came next. I'm not entirely sure. But of course, the great tragedy of this record is that it was Bon Scott's final record with the band. He died shortly after, I think, of an alcohol-related death. Obviously, he was left in the back of a car overnight by a friend, choked on his own vomit. The classic rock and roll death. But if you wanted to play somebody, AC/DC, I think, at their zenith in terms of just raw, well, perhaps not raw power, because maybe Powerage is more raw, but this one has a more focused, commercial sound. So that one, in a way, I think fulfills their potential, really. And it was quite amazing how they didn't sell out. They were able to commercialise their sound without, becoming over-commercial, I suppose. So that was the 27th of July, 79. Bon dies, and then just under a year later, 25th of July 1980, it's amazing how quickly they regrouped. They got Brian Johnson in, and of course they made this album for the ages. This is Back in Black, and this is my original copy. So I had a cassette of this, and originally bought this one from Cobb Records in Wales, £2.75. And this is the album that everybody's got, I suppose. It's just one of those records, isn't it? It's like Dark Side of the Moon. It's the Dark Side of the Moon of heavy music. And arguably this is where they start to turn more into a heavy metal band. Still got Mutt Lange producing, so you've got that commercial sound still. You've got the backing vocals. The guitars are very meaty, but the sound is still very radio friendly, but it started to get a more metallic edge to it. Great songs, obviously Back in Black, tremendous. Hell's Bells at the start of the record starts with a tolling bell as a tribute to Bon. Sheets of Thrill, fantastic. You Shook Me All Night Long, which was maybe their biggest ever hit, and with an absolutely coruscating guitar solo on that one. Couple of weaker moments for me. Some of the tracks don't quite cut the mustard for me. Let Me Put My Love Into You and Shake a Leg, a little bit forgettable, but it's certainly a monster record. It is a definite leviathan in the in the heavy rock pantheon. So yeah, that one came out 25th of July 1980. And then I've got two more to show you. 23rd of November 81, we've got For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. Now this one came out in two different versions. I have this version, which is the one with the stage gatefold. There was another version which had a gatefold showing people holding up a banner. Not sure if that was the original one or this was the original one. Couldn't honestly tell you. So again, produced by Robert John Lang. I think this was the final record that he made with them. They got a bit tired of his approach, I think, after this. They wanted to go back and be a bit more spontaneous. This is the record which they start to stray into this weird kind of, it's almost like sort of stately rock music. They kind of slow things down. Everything becomes quite kind of slow and steady. The title track, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, it has this really strange kind of very slow, long build-up. And it was a curious thing to do, because AC/DC had always been quite kind of fast and hell for leather, but maybe it was just their continued attempt to be commercial, I don't know. But yeah, a bit more kind of mid-tempo. Perhaps they lose a bit of danger and a bit of a sense of threat that had been on the previous records. Some quite commercial songs though. You've got Let's Get It Up, which just has an absolutely mammoth commercial hook to it, really. A few forgettable songs on here, you know, Breaking the Rules, Night of the Long Knives, but a couple of good ones. Put the Finger on You is a good track. Evil Walks. It's not a bad record, it's not the best, but it was recorded, I think, in a big deserted factory in Paris or somewhere like that. They had trouble with it, they had trouble getting the sound right, and after this record they decided to part company with Lang, and I think produced themselves. Now this is the last record I've got to show you, and this is one, I bought this one not that long ago in the scheme of things. That one, again, I picked up back in the 80s, but this one I grabbed well after I joined the vinyl community, and I'd had it on CD for years. This is Flick of the Switch, which came from, which was released on the 15th of August 83, and at the time, I think at the time, I didn't buy it because essentially I'd stopped being into AC/DC, I think. They had a kind of shelf life for me back in the day. I'd started to move into other musical territory. I think I was about 15 by now, and I'd started to take a bit more of an interest in contemporary music again, so I started to lose interest a bit. I mean, that's the one thing about AC/DC. They are kind of a bit one-dimensional. You know, they've definitely got a repetitive sound to them. One of the great joys of AC/DC is spotting the great songs and identifying them from the other songs which are not so great. A weird sort of indefinable thing where they've got this very narrow formula. They work with very few chords. The riffs are all basically variations on a theme. But there are some tracks where they're able to just strike gold and just, you know, create something truly memorable and truly incredible. But then the next song, using the exact same ingredients, they come up with something quite forgettable. And I think by this point I was starting to feel that the forgettable songs were starting to come into the ascendant a little bit, and I was starting to lose interest. Having said that, this is a good record. It's got a very raw sound, not really very radio friendly at all. Rising Power, This House Is on Fire. I've not even mentioned Brian Johnson. The change of singer was perhaps a factor in why I stopped listening to AC/DC back in the 80s. I think I found him too screechy. He's very, very screechy, quite kind of one-dimensional. I've grown to like him more over the years, but I didn't pursue AC/DC beyond this record. But in later years I did decide to catch up, so I'll really quickly show you through these subsequent records that I've got on CD. One of the reasons I got these CDs is that they're so beautifully done. Just these replica booklet style CD cases. They're just so nice, you know. So this is Fly on the Wall. These are the AC/DC remasters. So this came out on the 28th of June 85, and I quite like this record. It's not very well produced, but it's got a few quite dancey numbers on it. Playing with Girls, Hell or High Water. One thing about AC/DC, after that last record I showed, they lost Phil Rudd at this point, and I don't think they were ever the same without him. He did come back later on, But the subsequent drummers never, I don't think they quite grasped how to play with AC/DC. They didn't play hard enough. Phil Rudd had a very kind of sledgehammery sound, and I don't think the subsequent drummers quite grasped that. Blow Up Your Video. This came out when I was about 16, I think, and I did hear a lot of it on the radio at the time. 18th of January 88. It's got some okay stuff on it, but without Phil, lacks a certain power. This one came out when I was at uni. This is The Razor's Edge, came out on the 21st of September 1990. A friend of mine had that on cassette, and I used to listen to that one in the car quite a lot. Produced by Bruce Fairbairn, and it's got some okay stuff on it. Mistress for Christmas, Money Talks, and the actual track Thunderstruck is a bit of an AC/DC classic. So that one. Don't Have Ball Breaker from the 22nd of September 95. Don't Have Stiff Upper Lip from the 28th of February 2006, although I did see the band on that tour. I thought I had Black Ice, 20th of October 2008, but it seems I don't. So the final two got a show, Rock or Bust from the 28th of November 2014, with a rather impressive holographic cover. Quite like that. Not a bad album. And then Power Up from the 13th of November 2020. Quite long gaps between records at this point. I've got to be honest, those last two records, I picked them up, but you know, I maybe listen to them twice and then just stick them on the shelf. It's just one of those things. AC/DC are a band that I've stuck with over the years, one way or another. I've had kind of gaps where I've not listened to them and not bought their records, but I do sort of come back to them because they did play such an important part in my youth, you know, really from say between the ages of 13 and 15. So hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back soon for another Incomplete Collections, and until then, stay safe and I'll see you soon. Rock on.